Hello everyone, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Shubha ma'am.
Good
Hello
morning,
everyone.
Sandeep, sir. Welcome back again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
all the participants, welcome back for the session on 5G core architecture today, which is again handled by or presented by Sandeep, sir. Sandeep, sir, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, good morning and welcome back to, I believe, one of the last sessions on the 5G architecture. So today we are having a few mixed presenters. So I will be covering or continuing with some of the 5G discussions that we are having. At the same time, we have presenters from Nokia, Guru Prasad and Vinay talking about a little bit in depth on the product point of view. Suppose if there is a company like Nokia, which is provider of 5G services. So how are they looking at the 5G solution and how are they looking to solve the customer problems? So especially somebody looking to install a private network or a public network, 5G network. So what is the kind of provisioning that will happen? What is the management solution? Specifically, they'll go into the details of network slicing because network slicing is something very new to 5G. And there are a lot of innovations happening from different companies around 5G slicing. So that some demo also will be there. And the other part, which is most important, is the testing part. So we are trying to also cover provide some background on how 5G testing is going to happen because see the 5G is designed to be massively scalable, in fact ultra massively scalable, and now there are very specific requirements like less than 1 millisecond latency, peak speed of up to 220 Gbps, so density of maybe like 1 million devices per square kilometer, or even the roaming of up to 500 kilometers. Now the question is, how do we test these requirements? So somebody is deploying a 5G infrastructure and solution. So how do we verify that these requirements are met by the network that is provisioned? Because there's always a difference between what the requirements is and what the implementation is. So implementation and requirements are two different spectrum ends of the spectrum. So there has to be a place where both of them meet, where the requirements are met by the implementation. So that's a testing part. So the Nokia, obviously being a telecom provider vendor, has a lot of very strong test automation team. So we are going to have one presenter from there to talk about 5G testing specifically in the afternoon. Okay, so hope you enjoyed the day's session again today. Um, with that, we will get resume some of the discussions that we are having around 5G. So we'll just go back to the basic 5G building block core architecture, which is largely around the RAN and the core. So I will cover two parts in the first session. From like now it's around 9:52, so around 9:52 to possibly around 10:30, 10:45. Then again we'll take a 5-minute break and then continue the rest of the session, which is largely around the security part of it, because there is a session on security tomorrow, which basically talks about how do you do trusted security within the infrastructure. So I will also provide some background on what that is going to be around, and in general, we'll see the 5G security perspective, whether it is secure, better security, or is it that there are more attacks that can happen with 5G? What is improved in 5G compared to 4G, and then also how to understand tomorrow's session when we talk about trusted security, trusted platform security. So with that as the background and context, so let's get started. So any questions before we start, or anything that you want to share? So I'll just give a minute. Meanwhile, I'll start looking to share my content. Let me know if you have any questions. Just give me a minute. Let me get my. Okay. Oh, fine. So let's continue what we have been discussing as an architecture, right? Because that's something which is the core of 5G building block. So I will try to cover two aspects of it. One is around the RAN part of it. So just to give you a perspective of what is the big change that is happening on the RAN, and there is a term called ORAN, CRAN, VRAN. So we'll try to understand that aspect as well. Okay. Just give me a minute. Okay, okay, here we go. Okay, so we are back to sharing mode. Okay, so I'll just pick up some of the parts of the architecture that we have been looking at. I know this sheet is quite messed up, so let me get a new picture. I have it here. Just give me. Okay, I think I've stopped sharing. Let me start. Okay, so we just got a fresh picture of this. Okay, so let's just look at some specific important parts of this picture. Of course, each one has a different specification. As you can see here, there are quite a few functions in basically these are the control plane functions. So what we'll try to do is understand three things. Okay, one is the identifiers in 5G. So the question about what is the identifier, how are endpoints like user equipment, like people like us who are using mobile phones, identified in 5G. So there are different set of identifiers which is slightly improvised from a 4G perspective. If you are aware, 4G, a lot of identities that are there in the SIM. So typically when you take a SIM, there is a SIM card, right? Which we use for a 5G on a 5G data set, a handset. So when we put a SIM in the SIM card, so SIM has some few identifiers, like it's a SIM ID. So there is something called what SIM number, or of course there is a phone number, but more than phone number, there is something called IMEI number, like which is like a unique number. And there are a few public encryption keys and all that. So we will go into those identifiers in 5G. What are the identifiers, and how is it slightly better in terms of the 4G identifier? So how is authentication happening of the user to the network, and what kind of provisioning that happens on these type of functions to enable the authentication and authorization and enforcement of policy functions for the data plane of when the user's traffic coming. So that is one aspect that we'll look at. The other thing also we will try to understand is specifically in terms of the RAN concept. So what exactly is there inside a RAN, and ORAN, CRAN, and then VRAN, right? So try to understand that part as well. Okay, so let me just start sharing, discussing this. So obviously with all these block diagrams, so the one most important thing is the radio being here, right? So this is a obviously there is a radio that is always here. So this radio is actually what this antenna has, this called BBB, the BBB unit, which is where most of the core processing happens for our signals that come from our phone. So because everything that comes from the UE is obviously a radio frequency, it's a spectrum from it's a radio wave, and there's a lot of wave transformation and signal processing that happens in the BBU. And at some point of time, that entire signal from the radio wave is converted into the kind of a wired frame, Ethernet. And after that, these are connections you can see here that they can be that if it's a hardware, if in the old way of looking at it, right? So suppose if everything is in hardware, the RAN is in hardware, AMF is a hardware, SMF is a hardware, then obviously each will be one box to which you can imagine like a basic mesh topology kind of a thing where everything is connected through a box like this. So there could be different boxes. Each one, one is this is AMF, this is AMF, let's say AMF, and other could be AUSF, something like that, right? So this is what would have happened in a old world where everything, if each one is a box, then you would have fiber optic cable or Ethernet cables connecting all of them together like this. But that's not the case here. So in that case, how are these connections are going to be? So let's just unwind this and then see how the connection would happen. So typically, I will try to explain this concept. There is, of course, antenna, which is what provides the transmitter capability for the signals to be received. So, and if that once there is a UE, a user equipment, so all this is just a mobile phone, or it could be just a SIM. It could be less, maybe a camera having a SIM. So it could be anything. It doesn't matter what kind of. It could be just a car. I'll just try to write a car here, and that car could have a SIM, and that car could be talking to this antenna where this is connected to the antenna. Now, so the whole point is this has a box physically. That means there's a real box sitting in the tower, and this box is usually has two parts of it. Okay, and what is this box doing? This is basically getting all the signals from the antenna, doing signal processing and converting that signals into radio, into I would say packets, you can say. So because all see one thing we all understand is that the IP part of it happens right at the UE. That means when the UE sends, the user equipment sends a message or makes a call or tries to view a video stream, the packetization of that data is already happened. So that means right at the outset of the user equipment, that means when the user equipment is actually sending the packet out of this device, it's already an IP packet. So this is very important to understand that this is already an IP packet. So if you capture using Wireshark, maybe at the tower, let's say if there is a way to capture a radio, snoop into the radio and capture, run a Wireshark here. As you know, Wireshark is a network analysis tool. So it shows all the packets that are coming on the network. So if you capture it, you can already see that this is an IP packet. This packet that is coming from the user equipment is already an IP, except that that IP packet is wrapped over a media, which is basically the air transmission things. So whatever header that is there initially, so this is what is the media header. This is the air header. So once the transmission happens, the antenna receives it, and then it removes the air header. So whatever information is there, that is stripped, and then we get an IP packet. Once there is an IP packet, it gets propagated to rest of the network. So rest of these functions. So if there is nothing to be done for the packet, then there will be another network called core network. So if you look at some topologies like this, right, it's that network is basically a set of routers. They're pretty high-end routers. I have a picture of it. I'll show you how those routers look like. So this is like a set of them, not one or two. There are like many of them. So each provider has many routers, and this is how the internet gets built. So each country, each continent, each provider has a series of routers. And let us say if this is all India, and after that we exit, let's say we are making a call from Mumbai, then the whole of India's traffic is aggregated, and then under transatlantic underwater cables are there, fiber optic cables, they will get propagated, and the whole internet basically is built around a bed of underwater cables. Like a lot of underwater cables are there, which actually connects each of our continents. So, so that's the implementation part. But now, for us, what we have to understand is that these are actually these are devices, routers, which basically run a protocol called BGP. So BGP is the most important protocol in networking today from a routing point of view. So it stands for Border Gateway Protocol. So basically what it means is this has millions of routes. So that means if you want to go to Google, if you want to go to some other place, it has all the routes that it will help to send any packet from one place to any place. So the easiest way to find where is a certain server, right? It's very easy to figure it out. So all that you have to do is use a command called traceroute. So something I'll say google.com. If I say from my home, so you can see that, okay, I'm connected to Reliance Jio from my home, and then it runs, this is my local IP, which is my broadband IP. Then it goes all the way, and these are the various hops that it is trying to go, and finally it reaches a server somewhere. So this is how you can see the propagation, right? Suppose even if I say traceroute, say um, flipkart.com. So let's say something like this. So you get a different route. So every time you get a different routing system, basically it depends on where that each provider is. So similarly, if you do traceroute, say Covil, okay. So you can see that they're actually Covin is actually running on this Amazon server. So it's running on this Covin Pro. So this is the name of this server or the load balancer, which is basically connecting all our Covin applications connections. So this is how you can figure out where it transfers, how it goes into the network. So we are not getting into this detail because this is the core of the internet protocol, is the routing domain. So this is independent. This function of these routers, right? And how do they look? These routers are really big fat routers. So it's actually something like ASR 10,000, I think. So this kind of devices. I'll just show you what I can imagine. This kind of really big routers. Okay, something like this as you see here, right? So these are the big fat routers that we call, and they are pretty like around 10 feet tall and with a lot of computing power and all that. So everybody has something like this. I can also show you one more, Juniper Gibson. Okay, not this. Yeah, so typically you'll see really very massively scalable routing infrastructure that's typically run. So these are the routers that actually drive the internet. So everything, so there'll be like massive devices. So this is some of the examples. Like look at this. This is Alcatel Lucent's equipment. So these are the routers that actually sit here. So if I take this picture, right, we make a copy of this image, and if I can paste it here, if I can do that, yeah, I think I can do it. Okay, so these are the routers that actually make it here. So each one of them, right, they'll be massively scalable. These are each one connected like this. So it could be either Cisco, Nokia, I mean, they're like really quite expensive equipment. So this is how internet is built. So if you look at the core, if you open the internet as a box and you open it, and inside that you basically see these kind of massive high computing systems. So these are called core routers. So this is eventually what handles the data plane. So if I call this UPF, right? This UPF basically comes here. So these are the devices on which you will run the user data plane. So so if these are the so typically if I have to put a hardware. Hardware is nothing but a mobile phone and then a radio antenna, like a big antenna. Then there is a BBU. So I'll show you how a BBU looks like. I think it's Nokia again. Nokia BBU. Yeah, it's something like this. It's not too big, but so like this, right? The BBU master unit. So this is actually which has yeah, this is one of the products. Okay, I think it's one of the products that we don't want to. So I'll just take a picture of this. This is of course from Siemens. So this is what makes a BBU. So let me put it that picture also here. Okay, so this is the BBU, right? So we have to do that. Yeah, something like this could be a 5G antenna. Let's take one sample of it, right? So this is how, of course, an antenna, really massive antenna looks like. So I'll just put it for representation purposes. So that way you'll get the complete picture of how this is actually realized. Okay, so this is pretty much how the whole thing's it will turn out to be. So there will be an antenna. Of course, we have a mobile phone. So this anyway, I don't have to get a picture. So this is a mobile phone on which this is basically connected to a baseband BBU. So this is this is a BBU, and the BBU in turn is connected to massive least scalable router. So all this typically is fiber. So this is all is fiber. On the real world, it will be fiber optic WDM kind of propagation of the packet. So it's again, whatever IP packet is come, first it will come on the air, then it gets removed from the air, uh, gets inserted into a BBU kind of equipment, which in turn propagates it to the rest of the things. Now, given that this is how the things are going to be, so let's understand a couple of things here. So I'll just erase this to make it easy to write. Okay, so this is it. So so when a user comes in, so obviously the user connects to this kind of a tower. This is most likely a small cell tower, or maybe don't have much idea in terms of how these 5G towers are going to look like, but let's say this is one of them. But then comes the BBU and then the rest of the network. Now, so that few things that we'll try to understand. Okay, so one is the the connectivity, right, from the user to RAN. So this is what obviously we all, it's quite obvious that this is an air antenna that comes in. Then comes the RAN to UPF, right? So this is where this kind of connection happens. So let's assume that I have a fiber optic, I have a RAN, let's say in one of the city, let's say near my home, there's a tower and the tower has a RAN. And the RAN in turn would be connected to one kind of a device like this, which could be residing within a city. So maybe one city has some maybe 5 or 6 such devices, and all of them get funneled into one more device, which goes to the next city or a next connection. So then everything goes out of the Internet of India, like BSNL. You might have heard of BSNL. Not BSNL, BSNL, Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited, which kind of provides the intercontinental links for our country. So in that cases, so this is how the actual implementation would look like. So there will be an antenna, and the antenna will put it, convert it to take it into BBU. The BBU in turn will keep forwarding all the packets that go, and this is the internet. This is our internet, and somewhere we have our TV broadcasters, entertainment broadcasters, all our government portals. So everything is there. This is the internet. So the whole uh, magic that happens is on the internet here. So this is the internet, and all the internet is connected. So obviously everything will be connected here. So, and then somehow there will be multiple routers to which the internet will go through. So similarly, the internet is also made up of these kind of big fat routers that will eventually connect us to different services. Like it will be Google, or it could be, say, Aadhaar application or something like that. So all these, this is how the end-to-end connectivity eventually works. Okay, so now the question is, okay, what are these services doing? So some of them are very obvious, like EMF is access and mobility function. That means if I'm, so this is how the data plane. So if you look at it, what I just described is the data plane part of it. So all this is the data plane. So now comes the control plane. So now there are few things that we'll have to understand. Okay, let's, I'll just take another slide to create this. There's some identifiers, 5G identifiers. So what are the things that identify, what are the key identifiers in 5G? When I say identifiers, something like identities, like what is the, like our phone number is one identity, our SIM number is one more identity. So something like that, quite a few identities. So let's try to understand each of them. So the very first thing is called what is called as SUPI. SUPI. So SUPI stands for subscriber permanent identifier. So this is like our SIM number. Okay, this is one identifier. So we'll just list the identifiers and then we go through one of the other. Then there is called SUCI, so which is called subscriber concealed identifier. Okay. Then there is also third one called PEI. PEI. PEI is permanent equipment identifier. Equipment identifier. And there's a couple of one last thing called GUTI. It's called Global Unique Temporary Identifier. Temporary identifier. Okay, so this is good enough. This is I think to understand some of the basics. Okay, identifier, right? This is something that I think we'll try to understand what each one of them means. Okay, so let's start with the first of them, right? SUPI. So what is SUPI? So this is given, SUPI is something that is given. If so, basically I have what is that I really need to create, use a mobile phone is that I need a SIM, right? Something like this, it's a SIM card. So we need a SIM card. This is like a SIM card, with some circuits are there in this. This is a SIM card. So the SIM card is what we all know as a SIM, so which we happily insert into our mobile phones. And once it's turned on, the SIM provides the identifiers for the mobile device to connect to a mobile tower. Right? So this is how it works. Okay. So now, okay. So now, okay. What happens after this, right? So if you notice, right, I think there is a sequence called star hash 0 star hash 060. I think something like that, hash 06 star hash star or something like this. If you put this code this, maybe I may be wrong whether, I don't know, I can't recollect if it is star or 0, but there's some combination like this. If you do this on your mobile phone, some number gets displayed, some IMEI number. So let's look at, I can Google it. IMEI number. Okay, so like this, right? This is the number that you can see. So IMEI number. Of course, you have multiple SIMs, then you will see two displays in your phone. So every device has some unique identifier. Now, this is what basically identifies a unique user. So now, how is that useful? Okay, so let's see how that works. So this is also sometimes called IMSI, International Mobile Subscriber Identifier. So in IMSI, IMC, I think IMC SI. IMSI, International Mobile Subscriber Identifier. So this is unique globally. So anywhere in the world, it should be unique. So that identifies a subscriber. Okay, so there is some subscriber identifier for everything. So every time, everything you need to have an identifier. So once you put a SIM, the SIM has an identifier, and the SIM is mapped to a phone number. Phone number is something that is logically divided between the operators, but the most important thing is the SIM, because your phone number could, of course, today we have a mapping of unique SIM to phone number. That means because my SIM is mapped to a unique phone number, but that is not necessarily have to be that way. Your phone number can change, because tomorrow if we have a elastic SIM, some kind of technology eSIM, so where you can change your mobile number with the same SIM. So your SIM will remain same, but the phone number will keep changing. So this is something like in a network world, this is like a MAC address, and the IP address keeps changing. So something like that. So IMSI and phone number doesn't have to be match always. Today it is a match because the SIM, if you want to change to a new operator, either you you have to get a new SIM, right? Today also what happens is, so let us say you are in Jio, and you want to go to Airtel, you want to go to one more provider. In that case, you go to the Airtel, they'll give you a new SIM, their Airtel SIM, and what happens is they'll ask you to do MNP, mobile number portability, MNP, mobile number portability. So that means you do some process, and somewhere the operators will switch the move your phone number from this SIM to this SIM, and after that you will be able to use the new SIM with the same phone number. So phone number and IMSI doesn't have to be same; they can be different. That's one. So this is subscriber identifier. Now, see what is inside the subscriber identifier, right? It's something going to be like this. So it has three parts. So one is MCC. Okay, mobile country code. So that means if you look at the first three digits of your phone, of the IMSI number, it is a country code. Then there comes the mobile network operator code, MNC. So this is the operator code. So that means in one country there could be multiple operators. So in fact, I have that ready here. So somewhere you can see here. These are the different MCC and MNC code. So if you look at India here, so you can see this is the ID code, this is the MCC code, and this is the MNC code between Airtel, Aircel, of course BSNL. You see so many, they can have multiple codes also, and then sometimes it's shared, because in a country we can keep moving assets, so it's not unusual to have the same multiple providers having the same number. So you can see how many, this kind of tells you how many telecom operators are actually registered in India. So say Usha Martin Telecom, I think nobody would have heard of it, but these are some of the Spice Telecom. Almost 20 years back, we used to hear about them. MTNL, which is Mahanagar Telecom, MTNL, Idea Cellular, of course, it's now merged with Vodafone, it's become VI. So all that merger, everything is happening, but these are the actual, you can say, registered mobile operators, and they keep merging, demerging between different between telecom operators, so that should be okay. So there's something called Bharatamba Sales and Service. I never heard of this. Aircel, at least, we know it used to be a pretty big operator in Tamil Nadu. So Airtel is there always. Okay, so this is what is called MCC and MNC. Okay, MCC is the country code, MNC is the SIM operator code, and this is what makes up the IMSI. So when you have a subscriber phone, when you have a SIM, and the SIM number, if you can decipher it, if you kind of dissect it, this is what you are going to see. And after that, there is something called MSIN. So what is MSIN? It's, I think, mobile subscriber international number. So there is again one more division of that. So this is, I think, the total. If I'm not, I can't recollect the breakup, but it's something like 15 to 16 digits. 15 to 16 digits of number, and also phone numbers, right? Today we are all familiar with 10 digit phone number, but it will go to 15 digits, 12 digits, obviously. So it's expected that the number of phone numbers, mobile digits in the phone number will go from 10 to 12. It can be programmable. So, but 12 is what I think you will see a lot more 12-digit phone numbers. There are countries like Indonesia, for instance, it's variable. So it can be 10, 11, 12 kind of thing. So it is not fixed in Indonesia today. Indonesia, it's different numbers and the digits are varying. So in India also you'll see already a need for growing 12-digit phone numbers. So very soon our phone numbers will look like if your phone number is 944 or something like that. So what they will do is they'll soon add two prefixes here, 0, 0, or it becomes 10. Your phone number will start looking like 10944, something like that. So just this is something that will happen soon. So this is okay. So now this is an important phone number because it identifies. You can map who. Once I know the SUPI number, right, from the equipment, because when the SIM, when the user equipment, when the UE connects to the tower. So what happens is this is the UE, user equipment, mobile phone. So when it connects to the tower, it actually presents this number saying that okay, this is my SUPI number. Okay, but and there's one twist to it. I'll come to that in a while. But ideally, this is how it should happen. So this is what actually what was happening in 4G. So whenever a 4G SIM got initialized, got powered on, it used to provide that information to the tower, and the tower used to use that and try to get your map to your phone number, then your phone number to the plan, and everything else used to follow thing apart. But the only challenge is this is something that uniquely identifies you as us, right? Because today, tomorrow, if I'm able to identify your subscriber identifier, it's quite easy to figure out when somebody enters a network from any tower. It's very easy to figure out where that person is because that becomes the tracking identifier as well. Okay, so see, there are two ways. One thing you have to understand is there are two ways to track people who carry mobile phones. One is through GPS, so that is completely different. That is what most of the Ola, Uber, Swiggy kind of people use, right? All the cab aggregators and bike aggregators, they use GPS first. The other is at the tower level. So if I want to know that you are in this particular tower, if you turn off the GPS, obviously this location information doesn't come out of your phone. So today we mostly have location information, and some of them typically have location information turned on for even photographs, that selfies that they take. So that basically when somebody uploads a picture of their picture, right, to anywhere, and that picture also has a location information embedded into it. So unless you're ensured to turn it off, if you're not turn it off, somebody can take the image and pretty much figure out from which location you have taken this picture. So that is why sometimes a lot of websites are able to identify where the picture was taken because that metadata is already in the image. That is when we click the photo on our mobile phones, the location information also get embedded. So just ensure that whenever your phone has the camera settings where location is turned off, so that your location is not disclosed inadvertently. Okay, so this is one. So now this location that comes from the mobile apps, that mostly GPS, but if that is turned off, then obviously your location will not be there, but there is still a location identifier at the tower level, because since you are connected to the SIM to the tower, there is always a way for somebody wants to know, let us say maybe the police wants to know a particular mobile number and where that person is. So we know the mobile number. From the mobile number, we know the SUPI number. We will do a search on to find out in which location is this SUPI connected, to which tower it is connected. So it's quite easy, and then we can kind of make an estimate that okay, this person must be in this radius of the tower, because this tower itself is pretty hexagonal in shape. So there is some geometry that we can be used and say that this person must be in this location of the tower. So this is how, even if GPS is not there, you're still able to identify a subscriber because SUPI, because that is what is provided to the tower when the user comes and connects to the tower. Okay, and so if there is anybody else who is trying to spoof your radio signals, so by the way, don't think that you cannot do it. It's quite easy to spoof signals. So it's quite, there are a lot of radios called promiscuous mode radios, which kind of can be open to gather all the electromagnetic waves that come through it and be able to, based on the spectrum and the frequency, they're able to decode it. So of course, that is how interception, all the military grade of equipment works typically. It doesn't matter any country. Every country has something like that. So, okay, now in order to improvise the security, what happens is, so your SUPI is never shared on the wire. The SUPI is never put on the wire. The SUPI is never put on the wire. That when I say wire means it's not put in it's shared anywhere in the air or on the wire. So instead, there is something called SUCI. I mean, if I can pronounce it like that, SUCI is actually carried. So what is SUCI? SUCI is called Subscriber Concealed Identifier. So what is this concealed identifier? So basically what happens in the SIM, right? Whenever you buy a SIM, so we have multiple data in it. One is of course the subscriber identifier number, also called IMSI. So in the 4G world, typically it's called IMSI, and it's fair to call that it is still IMSI. The term is also used, though 5G calls it as SUPI, but you can still call it as IMSI. So this IMSI or the SUPI, which is the basic SIM identifier, right? Your IMEI kind of a number. So what happens really is that this SUPI gets there in addition to in the SIM, there is something called a public key MNP, mobile operator public key, MNP. A mobile operator public key, MNPK you can say, is also saved in the SIM. So this is what is a public key. So people like who are following cryptography, there is something called RSA cryptography. So this has a pair of keys, which is one is called private key, private key, and other is called public key. So there is a pub key and a private key. So basically, it's a basic RSA encryption standards. So when you do key gen, right, private key, it's quite easy to do a key RSA key generation. So okay, so all that you have to do is key gen. SSH key gen. Yeah. See, if you look at it, if you can see what I'm sharing, maybe I'll do it. So this is a private key. So if you say okay, temp. So it is asking for some password so that I can protect the private key. So I'll say ABC or something like that for now. Okay, so you can see here it has generated a key pair, right? So this is what is called as key pair. So if I see there is a temp key, there is a public key. Okay, this is how a public key looks like. So this is basically a public key which actually is stored in the SIM. So whatever public key that is generated here, right? So there are two types of key. One is the public key and the private key. So if you open that, this is the private key. Okay. So this is what is private. That means it is held by the private operator. So the other is public key. So this public key is actually what gets stored in the, so this is a very long 128 byte or 246 bit, 124 bits or 2048 bit key. So which is basically stored along with the SIM. So what happens is whenever your identity has to be sent onto the tower, right, for registration. Let's say you power on the mobile phone and the mobile phone connects to the tower. So when the tower has to recognize you and then try to identify you as a subscriber, so all that mobile tower will ask is for a identifier, which is called subscriber permanent identifier. But instead of sending this in the air to the tower, So what happens is the SUPI is now encrypted. So it's encrypted using the public key that is stored in the SIM. So it will get encrypted and sent as SUCI. So basically what happens is when the tower, this is the tower, from the tower it goes to a function called MNP. So if I go back to this picture again, here where we are talking about different, so here, so the what, if I can take a different color and draw it here. So this is a SIM. So there is a SIM inside the user equipment, and the SIM has this called SUCI. So which is the SUPI is there first, so subscriber identifier, uh, permanent identifier, and then the SUCI also. So basically, the way SUCI is generated is something like this. It takes SUPI and then it takes SUPI, which is the unique identifier, and then encrypts it with the public key that is there. And this is the public key. And that gives us something called SUCI, the subscriber concealed identifier, SUCI. This is subscriber concealed. And this is what actually presented to the tower. The tower in turn gives it to the BBU. The BBU in turn sends this to AMF. So it comes all the way here. So this is how the 5G networking is going to happen. So it comes from the tower. To the tower, it goes into a hardware device called BBU. The BBU will have a connection to an AMF service. This could be running anywhere. It doesn't have to be anywhere close to the tower. It could be in the cloud as well, something like Amazon Cloud, AWS Cloud, or it could be in, if it is Airtel, it may be running in their own data center. So it could be anywhere. I mean, it's up to the choice of the network operator to deploy where they want. So this entire flow goes into AMF. The AMF now will, because the AMF, what AMF gets is basically, it gets the concealed identifier. So it doesn't get the actual identifier, it gets SUCI, concealed identifier. So which is obtained by doing a crypto math. It's a crypto math of encryption of E of SUPI, comma, and a public key. I can say KPub. So this is how the crypto math will happen here. And once that happens, so what actually goes to AMF is actually this. So this is what comes to AMF. Okay. So AMF now takes this SUCI, and then because it has the other part of the public key. I mean, if you remember, when we generated RSA, there were two parts, right? One is the public key, and one was the private key. So private key is always held private. That means the operator holds it. The operator doesn't share it with anyone. Public key is what is given to everyone so that they can use it to encrypt. So the idea of giving public key is that anybody with that key can be encrypt data that they have to give it to me, but nobody can decrypt it because I have the public key, only I can decrypt it. Similarly, every operator will have a private public key, and the public key is given to every SIM that they provide, and they hold their own private key. So whenever this thing comes in, right? Where was that? This one. Yeah. So because this is what actually the mobile phone sends. The mobile phone sends SUCI, which is a concealed identifier. So EMF has the public key, private key. So it will decrypt and get the SUPI out of it. Okay, it will get SUPI out of it. Now SUPI is as I said, it's a subscriber permanent identifier. That means it's our SIM number. So what happens is in this UDM, right? In this UDM, so basically this is where all the user management happens. User UDM, as you can see, user data unified data management. Data here is not the data of the mobile phone, but the user's information. That is our data about our name, our home address, our PIN code, our eKYC. All that is what is called data in this case. So here the data. So all our information. So this will have information saying that if my phone number is say something like 944-321 or something like that, right? 321, etc. Then there will be a mapping saying this phone number basically belongs to this SUPI, or this SUPI belongs to this phone number. So all that reverse mapping can happen. So all this is provisioned as part of the UDM. So that means whenever a subscriber gets a SIM, the first information into the system goes into UDM. So UDM is where the first sign of life of the user is created in the system. So that's where the first sign of life for about you is actually provided to the system. So this is where, so whenever we buy a SIM, the first entry that happens in a mobile operator system is in the UDM. Okay, so this is that. So now whenever the mobile phone comes up, it connects to the tower into the BBC, the broadband baseband unit. That in turn goes to the AMF. AMF in turn decrypts the concealed identifier, and the concealed identifier maps back to a SUPI, subscriber permanent identifier. From there, we know the phone number. From the phone number, we know what is your data plan. So in this will have the data plan that says your let us say we have chosen say 10 Mbps bandwidth and say 2 Gbps per day is our data plan. So all this gets accessed here, and the UDM returns that to AMF. The AMF sends that information back to the RAN, and the RAN in turn, as you can see here, this UDM is also connected to SMF. So the SMF programs these routers, basically these big fat routers, to ensure that you get only that much bandwidth and that much data speed that you have subscribed to. So after that, anything beyond that, these devices will throttle it by putting rate limiting or anything like that. Okay. So this is just a simple example. So now there is one more thing that is very important to understand. After, so I will just cover that also. So we said there are three identifiers, right? One is of course the subscriber identifier. Then there is a subscriber concealed identifier, which is actually used in authentication, not the permanent identifier. The permanent is never shared, so it is always held secretly. But the concealed identifier is actually what is sent to the authentication system. After that, there is something called permanent equipment number identifier. So this is also very important information, both for personal security as well as mobile. When I say security here, doesn't mean the security of the network, but rather security of the mobile phones. Let's say many times we have lost our mobile phones, right? So in that case, how do you track the mobile phone? There is a number associated to the mobile phone, and that is same. That hasn't changed in 5G. Only these two are new to 5G. They were not there in 4G. SUPI was there. SUPI was called IMSI, International Mobile Subscriber Identifier. So that now has become that is still there, but it is now combined with SUCI. So make it to protect it so that not everybody can see that information to see where you are, to what tower you are connected. Now there is, in addition, there is something called permanent identifier and a GUTI. GUTI is actually a global unique temporary identifier. So let me tell about the PEI. PEI is nothing but whenever we buy a mobile phone, right? Whenever we buy a mobile phone, hardware, right? It's a hardware. The hardware has a serial number. If you notice, whenever you buy a mobile phone online, there will be one sticker that is there typically on the outside of the box with all barcodes, and that is where you will find the information about serial number, your subscriber concealed identifier, and all that. Now, this serial number is nothing but the permanent identifier of this mobile phone. That means if people who understand network cards, right? Network card, NIC, as we call. So every network card used to be something like this, right? It used to be like this, that had a card and it had a RJ45 jack in it. We used to put it inside the PC. This has something called MAC address, MAC. Okay, MAC address. So the MAC address is nothing but if you remember, it is a 48-bit MAC address, 6 byte. Okay, 6 byte MAC address, which is 48 bits. This is what used to identify the MAC address of the NIC. That means a unique hardware identifier. Similarly, the PEI identifies the unique equipment identifier for the phone. That means anytime anybody buys a mobile phone, they will have a unique identifier, and that's how sometimes if you lose a phone, you can track it, or maybe somebody gets a phone, they can say where the phone was connected. I mean, this is obviously used a lot by law enforcement agencies like police, intelligence. So where they suspect someone and they have a phone number, and they take the phone number, put from the phone number they can get the permanent equipment identifier. From that they can track what was the last to which last SIM that the mobile had, and what was so from the PI permanent equipment you can find out what was the previously used SIM number. From the SIM number you can know what was the previous location of your location. So that's it. So these are all forensic sciences. I mean, if you look at tracking, mobility, and all that, you'll see that kind of things being used here. So I will just tell you the last thing about GUTI, GUTI. So GUTI is again an interesting concept. So let's go back to the previous drawing. So in this, we said that whenever a user equipment comes in, the user equipment provides the concealed identifier. You notice that the SUPI is never sent inside. It is always the SUCI, which is the subscriber unique concealed identifier that is sent, and using that the mobile operator will know what is your UPI, SUPI, so because it can translate it back. Now, once this has happened, right? So let's say you power on this and you keep the mobile on all the time. You keep it on. So now, and then you keep roaming around. You go from one place to another place, one hop to another hop, and all that. So at that time, what happens? In order to help other towers identify you, but without getting your actual information, so there is a temporary identifier created called GUTI. So this is again quite interesting, the way they thought about security, just privacy rather than security. It's largely around privacy, so that even if you are hopping mobile towers, you will not be able to identify who you are. But of course, see, all this is with the rider that attackers in the middle will not be able to do it. But if it is a law enforcement, police, intelligence, and like NIA kind of agencies, they will always have access to it through the mobile operator. So because everything is going into these mobile operators, right? So they have to authenticate us. They have to let us use our mobile network, and for that they'll need our information. So they will have information, but somebody who's outside the mobile operator and who taps into the fiber optic cable connecting, say, Bangalore and Delhi, and then tries to attack through it, they will not be able to figure out a lot of information. So this is all designed to mitigate something called man in the middle. So what does man in the middle mean? Somebody sitting in the middle trying to watch your traffic and trying to understand some data coming out of you and what conversations you are having. Yeah, so this is what is called GUTI. I think there was some question here. Okay, GUTI can be analogous to boarding pass used in air travel. Yeah, it is correct, exactly. So yeah, so China, thanks for that observation, right? See, one thing, GUTI is always temporary. So that means as China is saying, right, it's just one-time use. So that means whenever you power on the mobile phone, and the mobile phone connects to the system, and once the mobile phone happens, all these things will happen. Every time a mobile phone powers on first time, all the sequence of the user equipment providing the concealed identifier going to AMF converting it back to SUPI converting it to a mobile number to a mobile plan to SMF programming your data plane for your bandwidth and speed. All that happens every time a mobile phone is turned on. And in addition, the GUTI is generated. So GUTI is kind of the last step of the registration process, where a unique identifier is generated and given to you. And when you keep roaming around, you will always carry this as identifier. You will not again use SUCI. Okay, the SUCI is only used when the first time it registers. After that, any transaction when you're roaming around, you go from one tower to another tower, GUTI that is already always used. And let us say at some point of time, your phone number, you power on the phone or power off the phone, or maybe you lose the signal, the connection gets terminated. So when this connection is terminated, the session manager terminates your connection and the GUTI is deleted. So that means you have to connect again. When you connect again, a new number is generated. So that means there is something in security, there is something called known plain text replay attack. Replay. So replay attack means, so let us say I don't know, I may not be able to decrypt your data. Okay. I'm not able to decrypt your data, but at the same time, I'm, let's say there is some data that is going between A and B, right? This is A and this is B. Okay. And there is somebody C trying to tap into this conversation. Now, this C is not able to see anything because it's all encrypted. Let's say this entire link is encrypted. So this person C is not able to figure out what is that you are actually saying. But that is okay. It doesn't bother the attacker. What the attacker will do is the attacker will copy all whatever you're transacting, and then at some point of time randomly replay it to someone. Okay, so it's like a replay attack. They don't have to know what it is. If there is some instruction, let us say this is an instruction to power off. Okay, so if there's an instruction to power off some power grid, and if the attacker doesn't have to know, they can randomly keep replaying, and some action would have happened. Some action will happen because it's just a replay, and whatever was having previously, that kind of impact. So that's enough for an attacker to do some malicious intent. So in order to prevent that kind of replay, what they do is the GUTI is made temporary. So that time, if somebody, let us say, sorry, there's some work that is happening in the neighborhood. Okay, so what happens in case of GUTI is that since it is temporary, so it has a certain lifetime, and even somebody replays an old conversation, because the GUTI is not valid, so that conversation is not valid or not used. So when the data is not possible to decrypt, all the parameters are there. So Sulekha, are you asking, can the data be decrypted even though these identifiers are there, or when is the data not possible to decrypt? So I'm not able to understand your question. I think you're trying to ask if the data, is it possible to decrypt the data even with these identifiers are there, or is it not possible to decrypt? So I think maybe your question is it possible not to decrypt the data with these identifiers? Okay, so let me put it in a different way, right? So this information that what we are using is as identifier information. This is only identifier. Same information is not used to encrypt your data that is coming. So let us say when you are watching YouTube or watching sending an email or sending an SMS, so that encryption is completely different. Okay? So for that you have a different protocol, so which is mostly around transport layer security, TLS protocol. So which is largely used in the data plane, which gets which is used for decryption. So this GUTI is largely used to identifier. So this is basically to avoid spoofing attacks. So anyway, we will talk about it after a short break. So I'll show you what kind of attacks can happen in the 5G. So when the spoofing attack happens, so that kind of identifiers can be replayed. So I may not be, see, since SUCI is concealed, right? You may not be really able to understand anything. But this is GUTIs actually have to be sent in the wire. Now, let us say if there is someone in the middle trying to just copy it, they may not understand, they may not be able to decrypt it. But if they are just able to replay it, then it's quite possible that the network will think, okay, it could be a replay attack. Though it requires a lot of sophistication in order to do a replay attack into the mobile network. It's not easy, but it is not impossible also. There are enough military grade equipments that are there which can really create something. So somebody can spoof, let us say you are a very top notch, maybe head of some organization, right? Maybe a government organization, and maybe there could be spies or some other enemy countries that can be trying to identify your mobile set, what you are using, and they may be trying to send some spurious messages on the behalf of the person. They may attempt to say that, okay, this person sent this message, though that person may not have sent. So this is kind of a, a mobile telecom attacks surfaces that exist. So in order to ensure that any identifier is not long-lived, especially because when you hop tower, you have to provide some identifier for that because otherwise what happens when you hop every tower, it is not that, see, the very important point in this is when you hop towers, what is the user experience? What is the requirement of the user? The requirement of the user is that they will not lose connectivity. If you are watching a cricket match on the mobile phone, your expectation is that when you're roaming or you're watching a movie on your mobile phone, the expectation is that your connectivity doesn't drop. That means the IP address that is given to you has to be persistent. So see, all this is related, right? The authentication layer is related to all this. So what happens? This is where all the action happens. Once the identifier comes, the identifier gets validated on the AMF. The AMF gets the data plane from UDMM. The UDM creates a session function for you, and that in turn programs the QoS parameters, which is the quality of service, which is basically bandwidth and data and all that. And at the same time, it gives an IP address. So eventually, if you notice, what happens in the system is that once the authentication has happened, the 3 or 4 things happen. One is, okay, you get a unique temporary identifier. You get a so what is that? Your policies are programmed into the data plane, and then you get an IP address. So when you keep hopping, the IP address has to be same, because otherwise if the IP address changes, all your L7 TCP connections, firewall connection, everything will go for a toss, because you know, right, everything works on a concept called phi tuple. So phi tuple is the combination of source IP, destination IP, source protocol, destination protocol, and the application. So if one of them changes, the entire session changes, stateful session changes. Because of that, your connectivity drops. So just because to keep your IP address persistent, so there has to be some identifier that we can reuse at every hop. And that is where this GUTI kind of systems uh, come handy, so that when you go to a foreign tower, or maybe when I say foreign, that means it's not your home tower to which you are connected, but let's say you go from, let's say, example, I'll give my Bangalore example. Let us say if I'm going from MG Road to say Brigade Road. In that case, I switch one tower to another tower. So let us say I am connected to MG Road, where I first powered on my network, and when I go to the next tower, so the GUTI is actually given to the next tower to identify me as transitioning from previous tower to the new tower. So that the IP address remains same. So at any point of time, once this GUTI changes, the IP address drops and everything gets reset. So that is where this is how things work. I don't know, Sureka, if I answered your question about when data is not possible to decrypt. Although I'm not able to completely understand your question, maybe you can type it again, exactly what you're trying to ask. I can be more specific in my answer. But understanding is that the decryption part is say, is the is a different thing, but the decryption, see, in this whole identity thing, right? Not the data, not the data part, just the identity of the thing. The only thing that is important is the encryption of the SUPI and the decryption of the SUPI. So if that is what is your question, so yes, the identifier cannot be decrypted, but the data that the user sends is completely different, because every application may use different data security mechanisms. If I'm sending a SMS, the SMS security could be different. If I'm sending a YouTube application, the application security could be different. Most of them, of course, use TLS today. It's become a standard. TLS is what is typically used. So in the next, maybe we'll take a 5-minute break. It's almost 11 o'clock, and next half an hour, I'll try to explain a few security part of this, since we are discussing this security, and just spend another 5 minutes explaining this architecture, and then we'll jump to the security aspects of 5G. Okay. So let's take a, it's exactly, I think on my system, it's 11, we'll start at 11:05 so that we can just cover the rest of the book. Okay, Ram Kamal has a question. He says, so when Guti change, how IP is identified and new Guti is added with IP again because IP engine. So Kamal, Ram Kamal, can you just be more, maybe paraphrase your question? So is your question about when Guti changes, would IP change and it will, and we'll get the same IP? Is that what you're asking, right? How basically the IP remains same, unchanged because of Guti change? Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, that's right. So, okay, so what we have to really understand is that, let me share my screen. Okay, so you can see my screen here, right? Okay, so this is, I just wanted to, there's one pretty good document. Let me share this link as well. This is a very nicely explained document on 5G convergence architecture. It's from the Broadband Forum. This is quite, I think, yeah, latest, like just when the IMT 2020 specification came out, just a year back. This is very good, very comprehensive in terms of what 5G architecture is. I think it's, let's see who the authors are. It has come from Juniper Networks and Deutsche Telekom, has Ericsson, Nokia. So kind of have everybody in the internet telecom world. So I will share the link to this here. Let's check if I can, or I'll maybe post it in the folder and maybe we'll share it. So here in this case, right? No, okay. Now the question is what IP allocation, okay, IP address allocation. So IP address assignment. These are the various. I think I'll just take you to a very simple diagram that I can understand. Yeah, here. So this is the typical architecture that we all have been discussing. So one is where the user equipment, it could be this is a mobile phone or a PC or any set-top box. It could be anything that comes to a 5G RAN, and then the 5G RAN has different functions. This is the data plane where the actual data goes, and from here the data network, there's the internet. Now, the very first thing that happens is these user equipment, they provide the concealed identifier to AMF. The AMF will reverse it into SUPI. The SUPI in turn will help us identify who the user is. And from the UDM, the user plan or policy is obtained and it's programmed to the UPF in the data plane so that we get the right bandwidth and speed of the internet. Now, the question about IP address, right? So, as we know, like GUTI is a temporary identifier, just to identify your connection of the mobile to the tower. So let us say it's something like this, right? Today, as let's say you go to a conference. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people go to a conference. So they give you a tag, like a dog tag, right? You put it on your neck and they go around. So in that tag, there will be some information about who you are. Your name is there, and then your maybe college or a company or maybe your affiliation is also put. And then there is also some event that you are interested, or maybe something I'm interested in, maybe in security. I'm interested in routing or something. Some your interest areas are written on it, and you put it and go around so that people who want to talk to you can talk to you, socialize with you, and all that, right? So that's typically what happens. So that is something very similar to GUTI. So that tag that you have, so some conferences have different tags for different days. Like they keep changing the color because they don't want, if they want to ensure that maybe the different pricing of the conference on different days, so they give change the tag of the color of the tag. So in that case, the identifier is quite temporary, in the sense it's just for that day or that session, and after that session is over, the ID is not going to be useful. But there will be another, you as a person will remain the same, right? Because your identity, maybe you carry a college ID which is largely more permanent while you are in college than the conference tag. So in these two identifiers, one identifier is your company ID or your college identity, which is largely long lived, and your conference ID, which is different identifier for every day of the conference or every session of the conference. Now, because you go from one conference on one day to another conference, they give a different tag. Maybe they change the color of the tag and give you differently. But your college ID is same. So similarly, in this case, your college ID is like an IP address, and GUTI is just like the conference day, that session conference tag, a pass for that conference one day. So this can change, the conference tag can change, but your company identity or your college identity remains the same. In a similar way, so what happens to the IP address assignment is that the IP address assignment actually happens from something called SMS. So whereas GUTI creation happens from AMS. So they're two different functions. So once the AMF says, okay, if you look at the sequence, right? If you understand the sequence of this whole event, so it starts from user equipment, powering on the user equipment. The user gets powered on, and it goes to the RAN. The RAN in turn connects you to the AMF. AMF now will challenge you. Okay, who are you? What is your identifier? So, and then the SIM will start, the mobile phone will start sending some identifier, which is basically SUCI. And once SUCI comes, the AMF will be able to identify you and create a GUTI and return it to you. And that GUTI, you hold it until you go to the next, until you lose the connection to the tower or lose your authentication status. Now you are ready. This is all while all this is happening, there is no data still going out. When we say data, let us say your SMS, WhatsApp, mobile phone, nothing of that is going out at the moment, because the mobile is still in the authentication phase. So once this result comes from AMF that you are successfully admitted, authenticated into the system, then the protocol starts sending. So that means that is the PDU gets created. So PDU, when the PDU gets created, that is, let's say it could be SMS message, could be a WhatsApp message, it could be a YouTube that you are playing, you start playing, would be anything. Once the PDU gets assignment, that is when the session manager identifies that you are trying to communicate something and gives you an IP address. So irrespective of what GUTI you have, your IP address is relatively consistent across all towers, all movements. But the only thing is that your identifier is only transitionary. That means, so in other words, what really happens is that for some reason you lose the authentication status, right? In that case, your GUTI could change, but your IP address would remain the same. So my understanding is that it is the PDU session which actually creates, each PDU session can support. Okay, so now it can also support multiple IPs. So we are not going into the details of how many IPs. It actually can support multiple IPs. Each service can have multiple IPs. That means I can have one IP address for my entertainment communication. So let us say if I am a car, a 5G car, I have a dashboard in my car where I'm showing some entertainment content, as well as I'm using the same SIM to communicate about the telemetry of the car, and also at the same time doing a connected car use case. So in that case, there will be three different types of data. One is the entertainment data, which is mostly the music and the movie that you're trying to play. Then there is the SIM, that the same SIM is also used for car telemetry, car health diagnostics, and there's maybe third one which is doing this connected car. So all the three will have different PDUs. That means they all technically could have different IP addresses. So, but that layer is completely agnostic to the GUTI relationship. So that is what at least what I understand from the spec. This also says that it is an enable temporary identifier. It is basically point to the temporary. So it just identifies. Okay, if you maybe one information I can add to GUTI is that it has something called AMF set ID and AMF pointer. So this basically also identifies who gave you this, who created this GUTI system. Suppose if a mobile operator has multiple AMFs, so it could be for different regions and different geographies, there could be multiple AMFs that somebody can use. So in that case, it will also identify you who actually created the system and who gave you that identifier. Now, I think to better answer your question, I think what we should look is for GUTI lifetime. so how is the what is the lifetime of GUTI? So I'm not sure if it is bounded by a time, but let me check on the identifiers. GUTI lifetime. I mean, even I'm not thought through in terms of what is the lifetime of the GUTI or when it is actually created or deleted. So of course, this is the GUTI number. As you can see, it's a pretty big number, has a lot of bits in it. So to answer what is the lifetime of the GUTI, I don't think it's easily available, that information. GUTI deletion. When is GUTI deletion? Let us understand when the GUTI is deleted. Okay, it says shall delete. Or shall delete the GUTI visited. Okay, I'm not able to completely get the answer to your question of when is the GUTI deleted. See, okay, here it is. Shall delete. Okay, it all depends again on the tracking not allowed policy. Roaming not allowed. These are the times when it will delete. Okay, so what we can understand is that delete file. So it will delete when tracking not allowed. Maybe okay, you can opt for a special SIM where you don't want to be tracked. When roaming not allowed in the tracking area, no suitable cells. Okay, so what I understand from these three statements is that as long as you have connectivity to any one cell, right? So you're not completely cut off from any cell. So until then, your GUTI will remain the same. So your GUTI will not change until you have some line of sight communication with at least one mobile tower. So your GUTI will only get completely changed only if you are if you go if there's no suitable cells or if roaming is not allowed. So let us say you're not bought a roaming plan. So obviously you go from, say, you just cross the border of, say something like Karnataka and Maharashtra, and you will not be able to switch to the SIM that is in to the tower in Maharashtra because maybe the roaming is not allowed. So only in those cases the GUTI gets deleted, but otherwise, as long as you have power in the phone, battery power in the phone, and you have at least cell connectivity, so the GUTI should remain the same. So that is what I understand. So that's a good question. Thank you for the question, but that's what I can see. Is generated with respect with aspect of IP? No, no. So GUTI will not have IP address in it. So IP address is completely more dynamic. It's even dynamic than GUTI. So what GUTI basically has is only these things, which I showed you. GUTI. So basically, it has this one. Yeah, this is GUTI, the 80-bit number. Okay, so this is the see, if you look at it, right, it has MCC, which is the mobile country code, mobile network operator code. This is the AMF region. That means in which region of AMF was that GUTI generated. So all this is related to AMF, and this is the TIMC, which is basically the what is that? A temporary mobile subscriber identifier. I think what is TIMC? So this is what makes GUTI, but it doesn't factor in IP. So because again IP can be different, right? We have IPv4, we have IPv6. So all that and there are something like there's some applications. Now the question is, do you need IP all the time? Do you require IP all the time? So the answer is no. You don't need IP all the time. So you need IP only when you're trying to use a network stack which is based on TCP/IP. All our HTTP traffic, all our good old applications, right? For instance, all our mobile entertainment, internet, YouTube, browser, everything requires IP because it's based on a TCP/IP stack, HTTPS stack. But there are protocols which are non-IP. A lot of trading protocols like plant automation protocols, like for instance, you may SCADA protocols. You may on a flooring on a factory plant, there are a lot of sensors that are there. So they may not have IP at all. They may not be even capable of an IP stack. So that means IP is not necessary all the time. But of course, from a user point of view, there is always from a mobile phone, right? In our case, we as a common user of mobile phone, we always have a mobile phone which has so many applications, like everything is based on HTTP, so that requires IP stack. But is IP address really necessary? The answer in a 5G, the answer is no. There are use cases, especially massive machine-to-machine communications, and just machine like one sensor talking to another sensor. In that case, there just be a raw sequence. It could be the protocol could be like a raw socket, where you are just sending bytes from A to B over the 5G network without having an IP stack associated with it. So IP is not mandatory. So in a 5G network, but if you're talking about IP mobile phone where you want to enjoy the goodies of all the applications that convenience that we get, for that of course you need an IP address. But if you are an ultra low sensor, or maybe just a machine, a robot talking to a neighboring robot through a private 5G network, you may not need a IP address. So that means GUTI is not doesn't factor IP address, but it is what, of course, since I think Ram Kamal asked that question, so we had to look at some documentation. From that documentation, we understand that it is only deleted once, only in certain cases where you try to roam and you are not subscribed to roaming. That means you cannot connect to a new cell, so a new tower, so that deletes that is the time when GUTI gets deleted. Secondly, when you lose any connection to any tower at some point of time, then GUTI gets deleted. Okay, so what is Sri Krishna? You're saying CAN. Can you explain what CAN means? Content addressable networks, or because there's so many abbreviations, I don't know what's on your mind. So maybe if you can type out what CAN means, or you're saying IP address can change or cannot change. Are you using it like a verb? I'm not sure what you're trying to say, but you can just expand it so that it will help us understand what is on your mind. Okay, so CAN protocol not based on, yes, there are protocols that need not require an IP address. So as I said, TCP/IP is something that we are all familiar, because most of the applications that we use, right, everything is a TCP-based application. But believe me, there are so many non-TCP/IP applications. Okay, I'll just give you non-TCP/IP protocols. So there's so many of them actually. So all MAC layer, right, where there is no association of need for an IP stack. So this is so that those are all called non-protocols. At least I know there's some trading floor protocols that are not non-IP, SCADA protocols that are non-IP. So for instance, your non-IP networking. See, this is mostly on the industrial Ethernet. Industrial Ethernet, like deterministic Ethernet kind of protocols that you will see the IP. So TCP/IP is always there, of course. So, but one of the interesting part about TCP is that TCP/IP is very expensive. So if you notice, for every TCP/IP packet, you have to put an additional TCP header, additional IP header, and then comes the protocol, another HTTP header, then comes the application data. So look at how many bytes are actually packaged within it. So this is where I think a lot of people when we try to understand the raw sockets. So there is something called raw socket, right? So typically we try to understand why there is a need for raw socket. See, the idea of raw socket is that just send. See, what is the whole purpose of a protocol? The purpose of a protocol is to send data from one place to another place, right? If I just send it to 1 to B. So let us say let's say there are two people talking to each other. Okay, so then there are two people, they don't need anything else, right? If I can understand what you're saying, you can understand what I'm saying. So we can talk in any language, any format you want. Nobody cares. So let us say both of us understand sign language. So we can just do sign language, use a sign language, and then try to communicate with each other. So then you do not need a protocol. That is like a raw socket. It is where you don't need anything extra to take my message from my end to your end. You don't need anything extra. But let us say that like a five set of people talking there. So in that, one person knows sign language, other person knows maybe a Hindi language, some person knows Kannada, and some person knows Tamil or something like that, right? A mix of different languages. So in that case, it's hard to make a communication across each other. In that case, we all agree that, okay, maybe English is something we all understand. So let's use English as a protocol. So then becomes a protocol. So that means when you are using English, what happens? You are taking your thoughts, maybe you're converting into a language, and then you are using and communicating with the other person. The other person taking is again listening to English and translating it into their language and trying to understand. So right, so there's an extra processing that happens. So TCP/IP, when you are looking at performance deterministic networking, where processing of every byte of packet has to be conserved. So because every processing requires nanoseconds of time, like it all depends on the spicing of the CPU. So if you are running something like a 2.5 gigahertz CPU, and that is the frequency, you can say the time required to slice it is 1 by 2.5 gigahertz. So that is something like 0.25. So 1 point, it will be something like 0.04 into 10 power minus 9. That is something like 1 pico minus 10 power minus 12 seconds is what you'll consume to process 1 bit of data. So if the more data bytes we add to a protocol, the more is the consumption or the processing time required. So in a case where there is a factory floor, right, where all equipment have a SCADA protocol, then in that case you don't need a TCP/IP. So there are a lot of protocols where you don't need TCP/IP. See, that is where this article tries to explain why TCP/IP is expensive. What is the shortcoming of TCP/IP? See, approach taken when 4G no longer appropriate for 5G areas, as mentioned in the above, hardware is more diverse. See, the hardware is so diverse, okay, and it has different power capabilities. So imagine if you have a power sensitive 5G network, so it doesn't want to burn the CPU just trying to create a TCP/IP packet, which comes to like basic minimum of 120 bytes of header size. So you can just strip all that and just send the raw data from A to B. That's it, right? So in case of embedded device, a provisioning of the resource required to manage and is a daunting effort. So increase in so those cases, so that industrial robots can operate at very high speed and achieve millimeter. I don't know what level accuracy. And so that means, so in a case where you have a set of devices that have their own way of speaking, then you don't need a TCP/IP always. So that's why 5G is one system where you can actually communicate without TCP and IP also. So something like audio or ATM. There's some examples that they're trying to quote. But the whole point is that yes, non TCP/IP based networking is possible, and that can happen as well. Okay, hope that answers your question. Okay, so I'll just take another minute before I know we have another presenter coming at 11:45, right? Let me check if I have any messages. Okay, sure. So I'll just take maybe one. I just want to show one picture that I've been looking to share for a while. So this is a picture which I got from one of the Cisco's 5G paper. It's a public paper that talks about 5G security. So I like this picture because they kind of try to put categorize different areas of 5G. Basically, they try to categorize the threats appropriate to every layer of 5G. So this is the user equipment, right? What you see here is all user equipment. And this is where all the antenna thing comes. Then there is a RAN, and then comes the core, and comes the data or the application, right? So what are the threats that can manifest in the air interface or in a user equipment. So one thing is today, our phones, right? I don't know how many of you have an anti-malware and anti-phishing product installed on your mobile phone. So I'm sure very few people would have actually. Okay, my screen is blank. Why is it blank? Okay, I know why it is blank. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Sureka, for letting me know. I know why it is blank because I was only sharing the browser and not the screen. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, now I'm going to share my entire screen. So this you should. Oh, okay. I think all along I was only sharing my browser, so that's why I think might not have been able to see this. Okay, now is this clear? Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, thanks, Sureka. Okay, so just to rewind what I was saying. So as you can see here, this picture is quite interesting. This has come from a public reference of Cisco, which has a paper on white paper on or a solution paper on 5G security. So in this, they have very nicely categorized the different components of the network in terms of user equipment, the RAN, the core, and the data network, and then mapped different security threats appropriate to it. I think Money has raised a hand. Yes, Money, any question? Can you zoom it a bit? Okay, is it better? Sureka? So max I can, oh, okay. I can zoom in much better. Yeah, this is better. Okay, cool. Nice. Okay. This is good. Hopefully, I will be able to keep it like this. Okay, and we have to be very careful, otherwise this can zoom back in. Okay, so as you can see here, there are quite a few things. There are quite a few things that is there. So okay, if you look at it today, the user equipment mostly in the 4G world or a pre-3G world, we're all around mobile phones. But with 5G, of course, you expect a lot more non-mobile phones also to connect, and that increases the threat vector because any system can be compromised easily at the source. So because our mobile phones, I don't know if, as I was asking, how many of us have uh, something like anti-malware or anti-phishing software on our mobile phones. So I think it's good to subscribe to one of them because they're quite available at like ₹1,000 for 5 devices. It's McAfee or Lookout and quite a few Kaspersky kind of systems. I think it definitely helps, uh, especially if you're using an Android phone, the malware and vulnerabilities, at least that you'll get some idea of that. So this is the the user equipment. So there'll be more attacks coming from the user equipment itself because that itself is going to be the source of connection. So there was actually, I'll tell you one very simple attack that happened, right? So today, I mean, as you know, most of the offices, right, and even your colleges, institutes, everybody has a printer, okay, which is typically connected to an Ethernet port. And typically, printer means if printer has to print, everyone wants to print, use the printer. So everybody has access to do an authentication, to do fire a print. So most of the printer is pretty much accessible to everyone. So of course, and rest of the equipment requires authentication, authorization, and all that. So there were instances where the attackers used to remove the printer port and plug their laptops and start getting access to a lot of systems. So that is when printer also started doing a port authentication, 802.1x kind of authentication, but that happened little later. But there were a lot of attacks where printer ports were being misused to launch attacks. So similarly, let's say if you have a stadium, let us take an example of a stadium, and stadium has something like say more than 1 million light bulbs, right? Light bulbs in it, and let's say all these light bulbs are grouped and connected to internet connected light bulbs, where you can turn on, turn off through internet. So that's how the next generation lighting is going to be. Everything is connected lighting. So now let us say out of millions, of course, when you have million light bulbs, not necessary that all million light bulbs will have SIM and everybody's talking talking to the cloud. It is actually typically grouped. So what happens is if I may group like 1,500 bulbs into one connector, one identifier, another 500 into another one. So in another way, if I can get somehow if I'm an attacker, if I can just manufacture a bulb or find a way in which I can replace the bulb of one in that group and put my bulb and create a malicious content in it. So whenever the bulb tries to send some data, I can maybe use that to launch some of the malicious code and propagate viruses and all that. So those are the kind of problems that we'll see, and it is still happening. And it's not that there is one solution for all security problems. Obviously, uh, every security solution solves only part of the problem. There's nothing to secure it end to end. So this is where it is. Uh, then there's antenna on the antenna itself. This is nothing new to 5G. Jamming attacks, man in the middle. So man in the middle is where somebody sits between you and the tower and tries to connect you. So make you fool you that fool the phone that the phone is connecting to a real tower, but actually it may be connecting to your somebody in your neighborhood acting as a tower, right? So that kind of man in the middle attacks. So in order to mitigate that man in the kind of middle attack, that's where the concealed subscriber identifier has come, where even if somebody fools our mobile phone saying that I am a Airtel tower and connect to me, because the phone will never put our identifier on the wire, it will only send a concealed identifier. You'll see that the attacker will not be able to get the identity. So that is one. So this is something that we will discuss tomorrow a lot in the 5G security session. As you can see here, there is a set of hardware that is all part of the system, right? So there's so many hardware equipments that are part of the system. So each one is a hardware. It is like a big fat router, as I saw. I mean, if you listen to the earlier conversation in the beginning of our session, we talked about big fat routers sitting here and trying to help us communicate. And the point is that these are all networking vendors, right? These are different devices from, say, different companies. It can be like again Cisco, Nokia, Ericsson kind of companies. So the problem is there are so many attacks which actually attack these devices itself. So forget about attacking the user or anything, right? If you get access to one of them, you will get access to all the data plane coming from all these users, right? There's so much of information that you can tap into if you can compromise this device. So there is a new concept about trusted platform computing. So that means, how do you trust the software that you're running on a system? How do you trust the chip that you're running on the system? Let us say if the chip has a malware. So because today, a lot of threats that are coming, that is one of the reason why as a country also we want to go into indigenization, because we want to ensure there's less foreign equipment, because we never know what kind of threats that can be there within the silicon level or the semiconductor level. So that is why indigenization is very important, and the authenticity of the chipset that we are using. So tomorrow we will discuss a lot about how you can trust the trusted systems, right? How do you trust the trusted system? Because we trust this entire system to be secure, which protects our privacy and our data. Now the question is, how is this trusted system protecting themselves? It's something like who watches the watchman kind of thing, right? So in that case, how are these equipment? How do you trust the software running on this switch? How do you trust the semiconductor running on this chip? So what if there is a series of routers? Let us say this is a set of 4 devices connected to each other. So let us say, how do you ensure that, let us say if your packet is coming, and if somebody inserts a new device which is untrusted, how do you ensure that the packet doesn't fall into the go into devices that are not trusted by the network? So all this kind of discussions we'll have tomorrow in the 5G session. So the entire thing about trusted platform security, virtualization security, DDoS attack prevention, access control. So all that we will discuss tomorrow. The last thing is the application vulnerability itself, because I'm sure you have read a lot of times in the paper about data breach happening from different people, right? Domino's entire data set got leaked. So that means all our phone numbers, if you have a Domino app and you have or use Domino's, and if you're given your phone number to Domino, possibly that it has got leaked. Then there are things like LinkedIn accounts getting leaked, Facebook. There's so many incidents about Facebook being breached. So there is always a because we trust and provide a lot of data to the providers like Ola, Uber, even including our Aadhaar systems, CoWIN systems, exactly, because there's all our personal data. We have provided our names, our phone numbers, our date of birth, our PAN identifiers, Aadhaar card identifiers. A lot of information is already given. So important to understand the privacy, and tomorrow we'll also discuss in terms of how privacy aware development and privacy aware logging and telemetry comes as part of the software discussion. So for now, I think I will stop here. I think we are just on the top of the hour. So let me just stop and then give you a maybe couple of minutes break before we start the next session. Okay, so folks, any questions that you think you have at the moment? So let me know. So I know I've been using a lot of whiteboarding. So where we are using a lot of whiteboard way to explain things. So what I'll try to do is I'll take some of the snapshot of this. I'll try to clean up some of the whiteboards that we have used. We have used quite a few whiteboards. So what I'll do is today and tomorrow I'll just clean up some of these discussions that we had, convert them into slides, and then share it by either tomorrow afternoon or by end of tomorrow evening. Okay, so meanwhile, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I think we are done and should get ready for the next session. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful session we had. Lot of knowledge we could gain from your experience and the knowledge what you have, sir.
Sure,
On behalf of BMSC and the participants over here, I would like to thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hope this was useful. So we'll continue later. Thank you.
Okay, sir.